Hello. I've seen a lot of mini sculpting videos that use one, two, or three pieces of wire glued together or somehow or other connected to create armatures for minis. And while that method works, and I don't want to knock what others are doing, I want to show my method, which you may have seen repeatedly in my videos. But this time I'm going to slow down the process and try to show it more clearly. This is an example of the armatures I make for my minis. The core, limbs, and head are all made out of a single length of wire, but you can take things a step further and make even more complex minis, all out of one length of wire. No gluing or fastening required, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. Basically a mini just like this, but add horns and a tail. I'm using 29 gauge wire. This is copper wire, but steel wire works great too if you want something a bit stiffer. I'll be using pliers, some sturdy tweezers, and a ruler. Normally I have a cutting mat with measurements in centimeters on it, but for the sake of making things much more visible, I'm using this white scrap board. I've done some quick sketches of the steps I'm going to follow here, and I'll overlay them as I go. First, I'm starting out cutting the piece of wire I'm using for this. I usually go for about 40 centimeters, but since this mini will have some extra features, I went for 50 centimeters. Find the ends, hold them together with one hand, and with the other, fold the wire in half. Pinch the midpoint nice and tight with the pliers. Holding the midpoint firmly in your pliers, twist the two lengths down to where the hips will be. Always leave yourself a little extra length. The extra length can be used to build out details for the head, like long ears or horns, or just to bulk up the head. And if you don't need it, you can clip it off later. The two lengths extending out from the hips will become the legs. Measure out 3 centimeters and bend at that point so they go back and up to the hips. We'll twist this loop just like the head torso section, but after looping it back up the torso to secure it before twisting the legs. I'm usually quite a bit quicker at this, but I'm really trying to make sure everything I'm doing is especially visible to the camera. As I wind each of the two lengths up the torso, I stop and measure as I go. Stop at the height you want the arms to start at. With the paths for the arms set out, go back and twist the legs. The two wires are a bit firmer when twisted together like this, but also very importantly is creating texture. It's so much easier to stick clay onto an armature with texture, and this process creates a great deal of texture for exactly that. And also it goes without saying that we're making our armature in one single piece of wire. Repeat the same process for the arms, folding the wire back in, this time at 2.5 centimeters, and back down around the body before going back and twisting the arms. For a typical humanoid, I'd clip the extra off after wrapping back some of it around the body, but we're adding a tail to this armature, so wrap both those lengths back right down to the hips. Once there, just twist them like you did with the limbs, and then snip at your desired tail length. With all the parts twisted together, all those twists will hold it together if you snip off the ends. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. Starting at the top, snip off the smallest amount you can, then take those tweezers and start to untwist the wire up there. Untwist and compare the length as you go, measuring from shoulders to the point the wire split, and stop when that length is to the desired height for the head. I usually go about 5 millimeters for this length. Same for the arms. Untwist the wires until you get to where you want the wrists, which can vary from design to design. One length past the wrist will be folded back and will become a palm for the hand, and the other will be for the thumb. Very hard, very tricky to get clay on such a thin piece of wire for the thumb, so this part is optional, but it's easier if that thumb is folded in over an item in the hand or just making a fist. Back to the legs. I usually fold them out at 90 degrees away from the hips, and then another 90 degrees bend back down. Then from the top of the head, measure down to where you want the bottom of the feet to be. I'm doing 3 centimeters here for the whole width of the armature, and make small bends out and then back downwards. This forms the armature for the feet, and the extension downward from the toes will make nice little anchors for attaching this armature to a base. At some point, I decided I didn't just want this to be some guy with horns and a tail, but a lizard folk. So I'm adding a snout. The idea for this add-on to the armature is simple enough. Just take a spare piece of wire and wrap it around the head, nice and tight a few times, then extend the 2 lengths forward and twist to make a snout. At the end of the snout, I decided to twist some wire back down the snout to give it a little more body. That was a bit tricky to do with my fingers, so I used the tweezers to guide the wire back down around the snout, and again to press that end back in flat. For posing it, the tweezers are fairly crucial to get a nice clean bend where you want the joints to be. Once you have a good bend at the joints, you can pull the hands and feet and head around just with your fingers a bit to fine-tune your final pose. And there you go. That is how I personally recommend going about making armatures for your very own homemade minis. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting. If you want to encourage me to keep making videos and sharing my minis with my viewers, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's a free and easy but important way to support YouTube channels. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.